I think it's obvious the general frustration that the Democrat caucus has, both with our more vocal members and non-vocal type members. There's a lot of frustration with what we have called the special interest special session that hopefully will conclude today at day 5, $150,000 or so into this thing. We are concerned about process and price of this special session, and I think it's appropriate that we would continue to talk about that. I don't know, it's probably been 7 weeks ago or so when I was speaking to the Pryor Rotary Club, and they were asking me about special session, and I said, no, it's not going to happen. Nobody here in the general public's crying out for it. There was some talk about it, but it's not going to happen. It's just not the right time. We can do all this stuff in February. And lo and behold, it was 3 or 4 days later when the call came that, in fact, we were going to have this special session. And it came with it, I perceived, and I think much of our caucus perceived, that there was a air of we'll show them, we'll show the Supreme Court that they can't do this to us. But in fact, I think maybe for the first time since I've been in the legislature, it was a showing that this body is going to maybe show the judicial branch some of the respect that it rightfully deserves. And I think, again, as sickened as we are as a caucus about the expenditure of funds for these special interest issues, when we've got so many other pressing needs, I think we are somewhat happy that the governor and the Republican leadership decided to heed the call of the Supreme Court on the log rolling issue. Another thing, and this kind of goes to the substance of the legislation that we've been hearing. I know there's much has been made about the fact that many of the House Democrats voted for the bill. And why on earth would we be switching our votes now? What's going on? Well, the fact of the matter is that doing it the right way, breaking these issues up into separate bills, gives us the opportunity to, in fact, vote for the things that maybe need to happen, but to say no to those items that are really bad policy. And that's what you've seen throughout this special session. We haven't been, as a group, lockstep on anything. Members are free to cast the vote that they feel is the right thing to do in each specific area. This whole special interest special session is a great example of Washington-style politics where we see a self-induced crisis with no real solutions, but it's a way to get in the news for a few days, maybe raise some money from certain groups, but it certainly is something that could have waited till February, should have waited to February, but that ties into how disappointed I think that we are with the process. It's disappointing. It is a step back for openness and transparency that this Republican administration, the Republican-led House, has told us over and over again they stand for. We think that it's offensive, and I know this has been stated last week, and I'm restating it again. We think it's offensive to limit question time, particularly in light of the fact that we've got over 25 members of the House that weren't here back when this originally went through the House. We think that limiting the ability to amend these bills through the committee process or on the House floor is atrocious. It's terrible that the process can be shut down like that. A great example is the bill we just walked off the floor on, Senate Bill 14. There's technical problems in that bill, just with the language, regardless of the substance that were pointed out on the floor. Those things could be easily fixed, should be easily fixed, but instead we're going to get the cookie cutter version of the ALEC proposed bill, and that's going to go back on the books. Knowing that the outcome of all these measures And make no mistake about it, we know going into it, everybody knows the outcome on these measures. They're going to pass overwhelmingly, as most of them have, with 15 to 20 no votes. With that predictability, it's hard to fathom why the most basic procedural protections have been avoided. And again, as I've stated before, we as a caucus are just simply disappointed that those procedural protections that aren't just for the minority party, those are for the citizens, that those have been avoided and averted. Our constituents, particularly the constituents of those members who weren't here in 2009, those constituents have been hobbled. I do like the comment made by Leader Inman on the floor just moments ago with respect to the amendment process. He pointed out that if we are going to be here and we are going to do this thing, if we're going to spend the money for the special session, then the citizens deserve that we get it right. And that we're talking about the ability to make even the most simple of amendments. We believe that undoubtedly all of these issues could have waited till February. They could have been crammed down our throats in February, but they still would have gone through the regular legislative process. There could have been a committee process, streamlined even starting in February. All of these bills could have been fully vetted through the committee process with the regular amendment process, and it would have taken a couple of weeks. And at the end of the day, these aren't going to change the economic landscape of the state of Oklahoma. There isn't going to be new job creation between now and February. There isn't going to be massive job loss. The economy is not going to tank in the state of Oklahoma because these things were not addressed until the regular session. The money that's been spent on this special interest special session could have been better used for the true emergencies that are facing our state. That includes filling the funding hole that's been left for our schools and communities by State Question 766. We could have heeded the public outcry for school safety and disaster preparedness. Of course, we would have also liked to have seen a crafting of a permanent solution to insure Oklahoma rather than a one-year quick fix that just extends a looming crisis for that program. We believe we should have spent some time on public safety and corrections if we were going to be here spending the taxpayer dollars. As we speak right now, as I stand here today, it's not my understanding that the House will not take up certificate of merit. If in fact the House is not, I would be pleased by that decision. I know the governor has expressed concerns after two separate rulings by the state Supreme Court that that's unconstitutional. I think it would be wise and prudent for the House not to take it up. Again, if the House takes it up, it is another attempt to punch the Supreme Court in the gut.
You mentioned that, or you said you don't think that these particular bills will change the economic landscape, but would you comment on the extent to which calling the special session and putting these bills through says something about who's the boss, basically, who's in charge, who's running things, and if we do this, what we can do other things.
Well, okay, to answer that, I'm going to step back to June, following the Supreme Court decision, and admittedly, I personally didn't follow it real closely, but I know there was some early rumblings in June about a special session, and as I perceived it, and I think members of our caucus perceived it, there was really no public support for a special session, or very little public support, and it didn't appear there would be a special session. I think there were some pretty important editorials on the issue, suggesting that it could just wait. And we certainly saw over the next month then the tide really turn. And we know from what's been reported with respect to fundraising from certain groups that it does appear there was a concerted effort to get it back on the table. And I think that does tell us maybe not that one certain group is running the state, but it ultimately does go to the fact that money does play a role in the process. That's not new news. It always has. But in this particular special interest special session, it's most certainly played a role as to why we are here today.
One of the things, when the dust clears, we're going to see that the actions taken by the majority party are going to underscore the fact that this was not an emergency, that this is not that there was no necessity for a special session. You know, the bills that were presented, many of those have, in fact, the most substantial of those that could most likely be labeled as tort reform bills have been taken off the table. And you know, did the majority party have some epiphany sometime mid-session that it's not necessary to look at hard caps on non-economic damages? There was a bill submitted. You know, it's like they decided midstream, hey, we don't have to do this. We don't have to do this after all. That underscores the fact that this special session was unnecessary, and $30,000 a day has been misspent. You know, some of the other things that you look at is, as Representative Scheer had said, there was a lot of just very simple fixes that could have been done, could have been made. In fact, there were House bills that were introduced that had those, that changed the word complaint to plaintiff, or to petition, and those types of things. When the dust clears, we're going to look back on this and we're going to see this special session did nothing.